Good afternoon, and welcome to another webinar in our series of webinars on the science of reading. I'm Margaret Opatz, a reading research scientist here at CAPTI. Today, I'm joined by my colleagues Tracy Handy and Ryan Hershey, who bring decades of educational experience to their roles as literacy specialists at CAPTI. We hope that today's webinar will expand your understanding of the science of reading. I also just want to mention, we invite you to join us for our upcoming webinars on the science of reading, and you can find the dates and details at captivoice.com. So once again, welcome and thank you for joining us in a discussion on the science of reading. Let's go ahead and get started. To do so, I'm going to go over our agenda. So in today's webinar, I'm going to first talk about our current reality in the world of reading. And then we will define the science of reading and investigate Scarborough's reading rope, which is a fairly common concept used across the reading world right now. Third, we'll discuss how to move beyond the word recognition strands. And then fourth, we'll take a look at CAPT-ESS, which is a research-based reading assessment that will help expand our understanding of students' reading abilities. Finally, at the end, we will have time for questions. So I do want to start us off by taking a look at our current reality in reading achievement. So I'm sharing the NAEP results. And this past spring, when the National Assessment of Educational Progress released the reading results, the nation talked about the drop in scores. It was pretty common to hear the phrase COVID slide, and it became kind of a common phrase to describe the trends that we were seeing in the data. But when you look at this long-term data, I think it's actually illuminating that reading scores have been stagnant for decades, and we haven't seen a lot of growth or decrease over that time. So while the science of reading has become really popular, and we're kind of seeing this like newfound interest in it, it's unfortunately being mischaracterized as being synonymous with phonics. So we have 32 states currently that have made science of reading laws. And these laws seek to improve reading instruction and achievement. But when you really take a look at the laws, they mischaracterize the science of reading as simply phonics. And this is unfortunate because it really does limit our understanding of what the science of reading truly means. And we here at CAPTI believe that it is crucial for us to understand what the science of reading means in an expanded way beyond phonics and the word recognition strands to really be able to support older readers. Now, this phenomenon that we're seeing isn't necessarily anything new. We've kind of seen when students get to fourth grade, there's this plateau where students aren't achieving like we think that they should be. So Chal and her colleagues labeled this phenomenon of students struggling with reading in fourth grade as the fourth grade slump. So they noticed that the data shows that students' actual performance falls far below their desired performance. And this is also that critical period when we move students from third to fourth grade and they move from learning to read to reading to learn. So Chal and her colleagues suggest that this slump is related to students struggling to shift from reading relatively easy, familiar words and passages to using their reading skills to acquire new knowledge from increasingly difficult words and texts. And while this might be helpful to have like labels and descriptions of the data, the explanations don't necessarily give us these helpful tools for educators to be able to combat reading difficulties. So today we're going to introduce what makes text challenging as students enter fourth grade and beyond, and what we can do to support them. So I'm going to turn the time over to Tracy Handy, who will discuss the science of reading and help us understand what we mean by the science of reading.
Thanks, Margaret. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us. So I have the pleasure of walking us through the definition of the science of reading and Scarborough's reading rope. So let's look at really what is the definition of the science of reading. So the Reading League has provided us with this guidance. So the science of reading can be defined as a vast interdisciplinary body of scientifically based research It includes 5 decades of research across the world in multiple languages. It's evidence that informs, most importantly, how proficient reading and writing develop, why some have difficulty, and how to most effectively assess and teach reading and writing. So most of you are familiar with Scarborough's reading rope. So the skilled readers automatically use what they know about decoding to lift the words off the page while simultaneously pulling the language comprehension strands needed to make sense of the text. So for example, science text will require me to utilize word recognition strategies to decode long words that contain many morphemes. Simultaneously, I will need to rely on my knowledge of background knowledge and vocabulary to make sense of the text as a whole. What's really important, I think, here is to remember that each thread of the rope is essential to becoming a skilled reader. If one thread is frayed or not fully developed, the strength of the rope is compromised. So this slide just reminds us of that connection between language comprehension and word recognition. Scarborough's reading rope was originally published in 2001. Since then, much research has been done on how word recognition strand and the language comprehension strands work together in tandem with each other. Have you ever noticed the threads in the word recognition strand are braided? These threads develop in order beginning at a young age with phonological awareness. The decoding thread develops as readers learn the sound-symbol relationship. Eventually, readers begin to build a large bank of words that are automatically decoded and easily retrieved as if by sight. As readers become more skilled in word recognition, skills become increasingly automatic. Today, what we are going to spend the majority of our time on is discussing the language comprehension strand of the reading rope. Notice how these threads in this strand are twisted. This represents how skilled readers utilize the skills based on the demands of the text. As readers become more skilled, they are increasingly strategic in selecting the appropriate component. Now that we've reviewed the reading rope in some depth, we're going to explore the strands that contribute to reading success that move beyond the word recognition strands. To illustrate my point, I am going to share a text with you. If you've seen this text before, you'll likely be able to make sense of it. Before I say too much, let me show you the text. And I'm going to give you just a minute to read that. Okay, I realize that most of you probably have not had enough time to read through the whole paragraph, but I'm hoping you get the gist. So you likely found it challenging to understand, although you could decode the entire paragraph. There's nothing wrong with the English and its construction in this paragraph, but it doesn't seem to say that much. However, if I tell you that this paragraph is about doing laundry, it takes on a whole new meaning. One thing that I appreciate about this text is that it places us as educated adults in a position that we often place our students in, reading a decontextualized text. This paragraph demonstrates the flexibility of words and the incredible difficulty of grasping abstract descriptions and concepts without mapping them onto concrete realities. This illustrates why decoding isn't enough for students when they are confronted with challenging texts. Now let's discuss the specific concepts students must understand to be successful in the language comprehension strands. We will do this by exploring what makes language comprehension difficult and what we can do to support readers. The first challenge of language comprehension is that the language we are referring to is academic language, which differs from everyday conversational language. So the first thing we can do to support students in language comprehension is to teach students how academic language differs from the language we use in conversational language. So on this slide, we're going to explore some differences between conversational and academic language. We have two tables. In conversational language, I can point to the physical object and say, let's sit at that table, while pointing to the specific table I want to sit at. There's nothing abstract about what I mean by the table. However, in academic language, the table means something very different. You can see the periodic table on your screen. Without going into too much detail about the periodic table, I can already tell you that it differs greatly from a physical table that I sit at. To make sense of the table, I need to understand how the table represents information, how the table is organized, what the information means, and how it connects to the broader context of chemistry or the world. The main difference is that conversational language relies on information from the listener, such as gestures and facial expressions, whereas academic language is decontextualized and relies on the reader's background knowledge to make sense of the text. When thinking about academic language, it's really important to note how it is constructed. Students and teachers, for that matter, need to know how academic language is constructed, and perhaps more importantly, why it is constructed in various ways. To start off with this concept, I want you to read a passage found in a middle grade science textbook. On the slide is a description of a volcano from a middle grade science textbook. This explanation is obviously written in academic language. If I were to explain the concept of a volcano to a child who has grown up in the mountains during a conversation, I would likely say something like, a volcano is a mountain that spews lava. This text clearly delivers more technical information in a scientific manner. Now let's take a look at the hallmarks of academic language. When we discuss academic language, it's important to start with the notion of register. The concept of register is significant because academic language, because it encompasses the unique characteristics inherent in academic text. In general, a register indicates a level of formality in communication that ranges from informal. For instance, a text message to a friend is considered informal, while a legal document is considered formal. Informal registers use contextualized language that uses common words, whereas formal registers include decontextualized language that uses academic and disciplinary words. So here the table shows us informal or social features and formal academic features on this side. So this is going to be our contextualized language. This is going to be decontextualized. Under the vocabulary, we're going to see common words under informal, those Anglo-Saxon words and phrasal verbs. Under formal, though, we're going to see academic and disciplinary words. Technical and specialized Latin and Greek-based terms are included in formal as well. Under grammatical constructions, we're going to see active constructions like verb phrases, simple sentences, direct questions. And under the formal features, we'll see passive construction, noun phrases, complex sentences, and indirect questions. Once you knew that the paragraph I shared with you earlier was about laundry, you are likely to able to understand and remember the text in a lot more detail. When you look back at that text, it is likely clear that the paragraph is about laundry, and you probably can't look at it now without seeing that it is about laundry. This is important to know because researchers have suggested that students need to build content language to overcome the difficulties in academic texts. Now that you know that the passage is about laundry, think about the meaning of the underlined sentences. Yet another area that contributes to the difficulty of academic text is vocabulary. To start off, let's review the different types of words. So you may be familiar with this text, Bringing Words to Life by Beck and team. And they did landmark work here in the 3 tiers of vocabulary. So the first tier includes basic familiar words that are commonly used by most students in everyday conversation. Students don't often require support in learning tier 1 words, although we may have multilingual learners that may require some instruction in these types of words. So common tier 1 words would be like sad and elephant and walk and baby, clock. Then let's move on to the tier 2 words. Tier 2 words are those high frequency words that students encounter across content areas. These words often have multiple meanings and are the types of words students require support in learning. All students will require instruction, direct instruction in Tier 2 words. Tier 2 words include words like combine and analyze and pose. Those words, again, that cross content, different content areas. Let's look at the word pose and its multiple meanings. It can mean introduce, like this poses an interesting question. It can also be used for artistic purposes, like pose for an artist, or for pretending to be another person or to behave in different ways. These multiple meanings of the same word can cause confusion for learners, which illustrates why explicit instruction is needed for Tier 2 words. The bulk of vocabulary instruction should focus on Tier 2 words because when taught directly, students will learn how these words can be used in a variety of contexts, just like the word pose. And on this slide, we can see some examples of those words. Tier 3 words are the last type of words that we'll discuss. These words are rare and content specific. Students will require instruction in these words. However, teachers need to be selective in choosing the most important Tier 3 words because the majority of instructional time should be spent on Tier 2 words. So some examples of those words you can see here on the slide would be pterodactyl, algorithm, and school. To illustrate the point of Tier 3 words being technical with specific meanings, think about the word magma. Magma is molten rock inside a volcano. Once it leaves the volcano's opening, it's called lava, which stems from Latin meaning sliding rock. These two words describe molten rock and have very specific meanings and increase the complexity of text. Now I'm going to pass the conversation back to Margaret, who will discuss morphology.
Thanks. So now Tracy's gone through vocabulary, and something that's closely related to vocabulary is morphology. So the next thing that we think is really important in order to really be successful in language comprehension is building morphological awareness. So let's start off by taking a look at why that is. As we start off with thinking about morphological awareness, I want to just define what morphology is. So simply put, morphology is the study of word parts or morphemes. And a morpheme is the smallest unit of speech that carries meaning. So let's take a look at an example here. So in the word eruption, there are two morphemes. We have erupt and ion. It's important for students to be able to break apart words into their morphemes because then they can actually make sense of multisyllabic words by breaking them into these meaningful chunks or units. And when we break apart eruption into erupt and ion, students will be able to recognize, once they have the skill through some instruction, they'll be able to recognize that ion means action or condition, and that it actually changes the lexical category of the word. So it changes erupt from a verb to eruption, a noun. And in this case, it would be like that the condition of erupting is what eruption means. And this type of knowledge of morphemes empowers readers to make sense of more difficult texts. And it's important because English is a morphophonemic language. And this means that the alphabetic orthography, or our spelling system, represents both meaning and sound. So as students learn morphemes, they're actually also learning orthography, or how to spell, and phonology, how to produce the sounds of the chunks of letters. So being aware of English as a morphophonemic language helps us to make sense of why slop becomes slopped when we change it to past tense instead of sloped. Now, this is an important note here because being aware of the way that English works allows us to understand the logic behind English spelling. And it also helps us understand the role in the preservation of meaning. So in the case of slopped, we're really preserving the short vowel sound in slop. But students need to know that, and they need to be taught that explicitly, why that's happening. So when we do teach students this background information about the way that English works, it leads to building learners' morphological awareness. So when we talk about morphological awareness, we're talking about the awareness of and ability to actually manipulate those minimal units of meaning. This is important because students with strong morphological skills can actually approach a new, unfamiliar multisyllabic word and break it into its parts to predict meaning of the word. So this means that students who have morphological awareness are more likely to be able to identify these morphologically complex words in a text and then break the words down by their morphemes to expand their vocabulary. So when we think about this, students' ability to recognize the morphemes that construct the word and then being able to break them down into the base words and then the suffixes, that will actually help expand learners' understanding of words and their vocabulary. So vocabulary and morphology work hand in hand. The more knowledge that a student has of vocabulary and morphology, the stronger their word level skills of identifying what those words mean will be. So ultimately, when we think about morphological awareness, it really does help learners confront the difficult language constructions in academic language because it gives them the tools to make sense of complex words in an academic text. So that's a really important skill for students to have as we're thinking about the language comprehension strands. So now I'm going to take us to the next one. So this next concept that we're going to look at for supporting students in being able to make sense of language, of those language comprehension strands, is looking at how relationships are constructed across a text. So this is important because in academic language, we use these specific techniques to change up our word choice to give a little bit more variety so the sentences don't sound monotonous. So let's go ahead and take a look at how we do that. So the first way that we do it is through logical connections. So we construct these relationships using logical connections, which really help us develop reasoning across the text. And these can signal various relationships across the text. So often, subordinating conjunctions are used to signal the type of relationship that's either within the sentence or across multiple sentences. So for instance, we have the use of when. When this material escapes, it causes an eruption. When is really signaling to us that there's a connection, there's something happening here. And this one is telling us that there's this temporal or time relationship. So as this material is coming out, it's causing this eruption. It's obviously more complicated than that when a volcanic eruption is happening, but at this sentence level, we can actually make sense of that connection across the sentence. So this is an explicit marker, but connections can also be implicit. And these are very difficult for students to comprehend because they've often been taught in the elementary grades that they should look for those explicit markers or those transition words that really do indicate a change in topic or a relationship between the information and the text. So in this next sentence that I've just shared, it says, material escapes the volcano, causing an eruption. So the connection in this sentence is still temporal, but it's not marked explicitly. And this type of implicit connection is really common once students reach middle school. So this brings on a whole new set of challenges for readers. Readers at the elementary and upper elementary grades have authors who write with those specific explicit markers in mind. They want to help the reader. But we're making it even more decontextualized for middle school readers when all of a sudden these words that we were seeing a lot in 5th grade are no longer there. So students really have to learn how to navigate an academic text while looking for these implicit relationships that are present within the various sentences and then also across the text. So another way that relationships are constructed across a text is by using chains of reference. And this is accomplished by using reference, which can either be through pronouns or synonyms. So both pronouns and synonyms are used to refer to previously mentioned nouns. Now, some pronouns are easy to connect, as in the volcanologist and she. In this case, she is fairly easy to connect back to the volcanologist. I think it would be fairly simple for most students to be able to say, who is she referring to? And they know who she's referring to. But once we reach fourth grade and all the way through compulsory education, some pronouns get more difficult. And this is especially true for demonstrative pronouns. That's like the word this or these. It can also be that, something that's demonstrating, like we're in oral language, would be like pointing to communicate a demonstrative pronoun. But in an academic text, we're not pointing, we're just compacting a lot of information into one word. So think about this as a reader. So we have this sentence: the observed changes in the volcano signal an eruption may be near. This means citizens must prepare for evacuation orders. If I were to ask a group of seventh graders, okay, what does this refer to? You really can't just find one thing. And that's what we are expecting of readers. Like, they have to understand what this is to make sense of the next sentence. So they have to be able to go back to that previous sentence and compact all of that meaning into one word. And then we're going to want them to be able to describe, what is this referring to? So in the sentence, the previous sentence, it refers to the signaling of a volcanic eruption. So students will have to be able to identify that in order to be successful in their comprehension. So that's how pronouns are used as reference. We can also use synonyms. So synonyms are used to create these chains of reference. And this really does function as a way to provide variety in a text. So when we're teaching writing, we're often encouraging students to use synonyms to refer to the same concept or the same noun, so that it doesn't sound so monotonous throughout the text. So let's take a look at an example. So here we have: the volcanologist observes the volcano. The scientist takes pictures of the eruption's changes. So here we're using a synonym. And as I mentioned, it is to help provide variety, but students really do need to be able to make the connection. What is the scientist referring back to? And if they can't identify that it's the volcanologist because it's a different word, then we'll definitely want to support them. Now, these are pretty simple examples that I've shared. They're all within the subject of the sentence, which makes it a little bit easier. And that's actually a good entry point when we are starting to teach students about reference and how to refer back to what a referent is referring to. But these definitely get more complex as we move through the academic grades and into more disciplinary texts. So that is how logical connections are used and how reference are used to really create that that connection across text. Now we're going to look at the sixth and final concept that students really need to know in order to be successful in language comprehension. So this one is about pragmatics, or how language is used in different contexts. This is very related to what Tracy was referring to in registers. So pragmatics is truly knowing how we communicate through a text message versus a legal document. When we think about reading, there are very specific skills that students need to know. And I want to start off foundationally. So at the very foundation, when students are learning to read, they have to know that you open up a book and you start at the front and you move to the back. You read from left to right and top to bottom in the pages. This is that early level print concept, but I think sometimes as upper elementary and middle school teachers, we forget that students might actually need support in those areas. I think about the first time that I ever saw a graphic novel. I was an adult, and it took me a while to figure out how to navigate going across the page and down, and how to really move when some of the boxes were different sizes. But I also think back to myself when I was in middle school, and I have this very clear memory of not knowing how to navigate the science textbook. So I was just reading down the columns, and I didn't know, like, the information wasn't making much sense, but I just kept reading that way. And it wasn't until the teacher said, oh, actually, you read this column and then there's a break here, and then you're going to go to this next column. So we really have to be able to teach students how to navigate the text to be able to make sense of it. And really navigating the text is different for each genre. Students should be taught how to look at the various features of the genre. So whether it's a science textbook or a history textbook, students should be taught to look at the titles, the subheadings, and even something as simple as when to read the captions of the pictures, or, as Tracy showed us earlier, how to really navigate those tables that are within academic text, and how to understand what is the information in that table telling us, and how do we know? Students should also be able to ask lots of questions about, well, what is this table representing? How do we like figure this out? So those are all features that students should really know. And then another component is that the students, especially starting in middle school and all the way through high school, they need to know how different disciplines operate. So every discipline writes in a different way, and students need to know how those forms of construction really require us as readers to place ourselves in the text as one of these insiders, as a scientist or as a historian, and to be reading through that lens. So I share this table, and this is coming from Shanahan and Shanahan, who really talk about drawing disciplinary conclusions and really stepping inside as an insider to be able to read the text through the lens of the author. So kind of questioning, like, well, why did the author do it this way? How did the author know? So within each of the disciplines, there's a different way to do this. So a literary scholar needs to assume a critical stance. So as you're reading a literary text, you're questioning, why did the author present the information in this way? Wait, how did they like make this claim? We should be assuming this critical stance and questioning how the author is presenting the information. Then once that's for literary scholars, scientists are different. If you took a critical stance for a scientist, it wouldn't work as well because scientists don't create their text in that way. What scientists do is they are trying to present their information. And a lot of times we're presenting information in science as if it's fact. But what we really need to teach students is from that insider perspective, we need to be determining, did the scientists use valid sources and valid experiments to actually produce their text? Students need to learn how to question how the scientist knows what they know. And is it a valid form of evidence? Is the evidence high enough quality for us to believe it? I can honestly say, as a student, I never had a science teacher help me with that. And I think that that is a really important component to disciplinary literacy, is helping our students learn how to question what is being presented to us. I also think it's much more motivating for students when they are taught to question rather than just soak it in as fact. I think, okay, so that's it for scientists. And as far as historians go, historians, as they construct a text, they are writing it from their perspective. They are for sure gathering lots of information from lots of various sources, but it is coming from their perspective. So when we step inside the world of reading like a historian, the reader needs to start thinking about what is the author's positionality? What's their bias that they're bringing to this text? And then they need to spend some time identifying those areas where the author may be showing some of their bias. And this is truly important because all historical accounts are subjective. So students should know that. I think when you think about it that way, it's almost like we're solving a mystery. Like, what is it that the author is trying to hide from us? Or what are they trying to make us believe? What are they convincing us of? And when students read like that, they are really able to step in as an insider. So when students are able to do that, it ties back to pragmatics because it's teaching students how language operates in each of these disciplines, which is really effective for helping students in developing their language comprehension because they are immersed in the setting as a cultural insider within each of these disciplines. So I'm going to move on to this next slide. So I've just finished the final concept that we have that will help students be successful in language comprehension. And I returned to this idea of how can we expand our view of the science of reading? And really, it's expanding it beyond phonics. So Tracy and I have just presented to you 6 different ways that we think are really helpful in expanding our view of the science of reading beyond simply being able to decode. Tracy's illustration with the decontextualized laundry text really helps us see that decoding alone isn't going to be enough. And I think we see this again and again in the data when we look and we see that we have this stagnant data across decades. It should be no surprise that students in K3 seem to be doing okay, but that's where we're putting all of our resources and efforts. We need to really expand to older students and get into the language comprehension to do just that. So we've talked about what we need to know and some ideas about how we can really expand what students are able to do within those language comprehension strands. But I think importantly, we need to also be able to understand what it is that students can do within these language comprehension strands. And to do this, Ryan is going to take us through Read Basics. And Read Basics is a scientifically based reading assessment that can be used to diagnose students' reading abilities within the language comprehension strands, but also inform instruction to prevent future reading difficulties. All right, Ryan, take it away.
Thanks, Margaret.
Sharing.
All right, so I'm going to take you through what you can expect when using a scientifically based assessment. And I'm going to present this from the perspective of a teacher because I spent 16 years trying to teach reading at the middle school level. And I say trying on purpose because reading involves so many components like you've seen. So I often ask myself, am I doing this the right way? And that is the beauty of a scientifically based assessment. It really takes out the guesswork. So I'm going to log in here as a teacher. And then we're a Google School, so I'm just going to click that. All right, let's say I have a brand new set of 7th graders in front of me, and I just want to get a full picture of their reading ability. So I'm going to create a new assignment. I'll just name it Fall, select 7th grade. And then down here, you'll notice there's 6 subtests. There's word recognition and decoding, vocabulary, morphology. Those are like the word level skills. And then we move on to sentence processing, like Margaret was mentioning, all those discourse markers and those even those implicit transitions and references. And then we have the reading efficiency, which is like the fluency piece, and reading comprehension. So because I know most of my students can finish this in less than an hour, I'm going to break it up into 2 sessions. So I'll select these 4 for 1 session, and then I'll select these 2 for the 2nd session. And flexibility is huge for a teacher here. I can even just, if I wanted to progress monitor, I was doing some intervention on word analysis with some students, I can just assign them just this one even. So let's say I gave the whole battery, and then no one likes to administer tests, or at least I don't. But the exciting part of assessments is the data that you get. Let me show you what that looks like here. And you could probably assume, based on the subtests there, the type of information I'm going to get, as opposed to what I'm used to as a middle school teacher, getting back information like this student's struggling with key ideas in informational text, which is helpful, but I can offer some comprehension strategies, but that might not be the root of the issue. I'm going to click on my class here. I get a global view of them as readers and their profiles. And then I can see, this is a good administrative tool. I can see all the students took each of the subtests. And then the scale score is really helpful for the classroom teacher, because I can see we've got some strong reading fluency. I bet they'll appreciate some readers theater activities. And then I notice there is a number 8 specifically of students that are really struggling with decoding. And I'm going to keep that in mind as I get into the specific student reports. And then we have the grade equivalent score. And then the RTI tier recommendations are able to be set by my district. So they look at our capacity for intervention, and they set these tiers specifically for our staffing. And then I'm going to move to the student class report here. And this is where I live as a teacher, because I can sort any of these columns. Like, let's say I have a literature circle project coming up, and I want to give students a text that's really fit for them. I can do that. And you'll notice we work kind of left to right here. We have the word recognition and decoding, and then those same word level skills with vocabulary, like the synonyms, the morphology, the meaningful parts, which then leads into the sentence processing, which complicates things as we've learned. And then ultimately, we're trying to get to this skilled reading comprehension. So all of these kind of lead up to that. So going back to that group of students I wanted to pull for an intervention group, I can do that easily right here. And then that's usually where I would get stuck. As a middle school teacher, I have this group of students in front of me, but I really don't know what to do once they're sitting in front of me. And I always tell the story, I used to run down to the elementary school and ask, what can you give me for this? But inside Read Basics, we're able to offer these recommendations. First, let me just show you. I can click on an individual student, and it shows me their overall profile, their performance recently in each subtest, the lexile changing over time. And then each subtest, I can really dive in and see how long they took on it, what percentage they got correct. And this is the neat tool. It tells me what ability they have at this level, and then what they would benefit from. And that's for each and every subtest. And this says the student will benefit from some decoding or word level interventions. So I'm going to click on the recommendations. And Margaret, Tracy, and myself have called evidence-based practices for each foundational skill. And we've created a scope and sequence for each skill to lead to strong performance in each subtest. And it really provides a starting point for the teacher. And this is exactly what I would need as a middle school or high school teacher providing intervention. And then I can select one of these links, and it would give me an intervention resource, and I can make sure that it fits my demographic of students for that group. And if it does, I would carry out that intervention. And then I would want to progress monitor probably in about 8 weeks. So, and this is where this report history kind of shows the growth measure here. So you can see this student was struggling with vocabulary and morphology. And then after we did 8 weeks of intervention, and we had a multi-component instructional piece here in place, then we see some growth in that word level skill, which then ultimately improves reading comprehension. Now you could say, well, maybe it's because of that tier 1 comprehension strategies I was teaching, but those comprehension strategies are not hitting this need for word level intervention. So it really helps to have each of these foundational pieces reporting to us. And what the need of the student is. So not only with these recommendations, I'm going to stop sharing and pass it back to Margaret, but she'll be able to tell you, in addition to that, how we can help support the schools we work with.
Great, thanks, Ryan. So as Ryan mentioned, we work closely with schools to be able to provide personalized support. So when we think about personalized support, as a team, as a literacy team, we work together to really be able to provide you with a detailed analysis of students' data, and more importantly, provide specific instructional recommendations based on the observed data trends. So we do this because as former teachers, and as Ryan mentioned, he was running down to the elementary school. As former teachers, like, we definitely get it, and we understand that we have great data to share, and then what you do with it is just as important as the great data. So we put in a lot of personalized support to be able to support you throughout the implementation process. If you have questions about that, you can definitely feel free to reach out to us. So I just want to thank you for attending our webinar and expanding the view of the science of reading. We hope you walk away with some methods for how to really support students in achieving within those language comprehension strands. So thank you. We have our contact information here. Thank you so much for attending.